Greetings, greetings and blessings in that divine name of Kadamawi Haile Selassie I and Empress Wazero Menin Asfa. Welcome and give thanks to all for coming forward. This is the SOSACRU anniversary event. I and I are also honoring Ainai Ancient, now ancestor, the great Congo Bongo Ras Irice Clark. And I will be chanting for I matriarch, Nana Farika as well, celebrating her 87 years and chanting for the full restoration of Mama Faya's temple. At this time, I will begin in traditional Idor study group fashion. I will open with the selected speeches of His Imperial Majesty. The study group is currently reading from page 294. And I pray thee, I am Dr. Waletti Beresford. Give thanks again for coming forward. And I will begin from page 294. And it is the reading that is documenting the unveiling of Menelik's statue. It's not on the screen for ones to follow, but I will read it and then I will have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the message that is coming forward from this reading. Reading from page 294 of the selected speeches, Unveiling Menelik's Statue. Your Highnesses, honorable foreign representatives and dignitaries, this day of the erection of a statue to Emperor Menelik II is a great and happy day for the entire people of Ethiopia. The life of a man is full of many sacrifices. However, after life, there is nothing better one could leave behind other than a worthy and memorable name for one's performances, and the erection of this statue today proves that Emperor Menelik II has been blessed to get this well-deserved reward for his efforts. Although Emperor Menelik II was Emperor of Ethiopia by virtue of his long and traditional royal lineage, all of you patriots and heroes are well aware of the fact that he was fortunate enough to have successfully pursued what Emperor Tewodros and Emperor Johannes started in the struggle for the unification of all of the provinces which were divided and balkanized as a result of the Battle of Grange. During the period of his father, Emperor Lebna Dengal. In all his efforts with the blessings of Jah, his success in uniting Ethiopia has made his name renowned all over the world. Besides considering the unity of Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II also established friendly relations with other governments, thus providing for Ethiopia favorable international relations and assuring the orderly progress of her people. Having been fortunate enough and blessed with a peaceful reign, farmers worked hard and businessmen did their part well and consequently attained great prosperity. Let history tell what achievements Emperor Menelik II made for his people and his country, for it will be impossible for us now to enumerate them all here. No matter how intelligent and brave, no one on earth can escape death, and Emperor Menelik II had to pass from this world on December 13th, 1913. After having worked as much as he could for the growth of Ethiopia and the progress of his people. Although the statue in no way can stand as a symbolic example for all the achievements Emperor Menelik II made for Ethiopia, we are erecting this statue because as human beings, there is nothing more we can do. Many are the emperors who in the past worked commendably for their country. However, we know of no king thus far who has a statue erected in his name. It was Emperor Menelik II who started and left behind for us projects which brought us closer to other countries, and it is because of this that we take it upon ourselves to erect statues as symbolic tokens to emperors who left behind significant works. And to this effect, we can say that this statue stands to signify the great works of Emperor Menelik II. Moreover, the presence of so many dignitaries and representatives of foreign governments who are here for our coronation, and those representing governments that signed friendship treaties with Emperor Menelik II, as well as those of others to witness the inauguration of this statue and share our happiness, shows how great indeed he has been. From now on, we will continue to erect statues, not only for kings, but also for those patriots who perform or have performed great works for their country in memory of their name and their works. So this is the speech that was given on actual Coronation Day, November 2nd, 1930. That was the day that the statue of Emperor Menelik II was unveiled. It was the first of its kind. It was the first statue that would pay homage to an emperor or a king that had passed on, and it then thus became a tradition in Ethiopia going forward from that time. So for the study group, let I move in that same vein and maybe open up the floor for discussion just for a little bit to kind of talk about what I gather from that. I will begin by saying that, His Majesty is reminding I, it's not only the kings, not only the emperors, but also the great patriots of Ethiopia who have fought and labored on behalf of their country, for their country, and thus they too will also be remembered with statues. So again, His Majesty is always showing I just reward and balance across the board for the works. No big I's and no little U's, just really acknowledging greatness wherever it may be found. So for these few words, I give thanks, and the floor is open if anyone wants to comment on the reading, the unveiling of the statue, November 2nd, 1930, even the significance thereof. Give thanks.
Thank you, Sister Walletti.
Give thanks.
Were you going to take any comments from the audience, or do we move straight to?
I was taking comments. I wasn't sure if they were hearing I, but I did say we can take some comments if one wanted to block. I did not know that Emperor Menelik's statue was the first statue to be commemorated in Ethiopia, and that it happened on Coronation Day. I always see the ceremony and the services at the church and all of that, but there was actually a great unveiling of the Lion King's statue. So that was mighty to learn. I don't know if anyone else wants to share a sound.
Blessed love, Mama Walletti.
Blessed
Give
love.
thanks for those sounds.
Thanks.
What strikes me, because I haven't read that passage in a very long time, but I have had occasion to think about the coronation and the manner in which His Majesty strategically used his coronation. So if my memory serves me correctly, he reserved the privilege of the unveiling of the statue to the French ambassador. I think his name was Pierre Espy or Esprit. I'm not 100% sure. But in any event, the unveiling was done in front of the representatives of the imperial powers. And in addition to the way in which His Majesty thought about everyone contributing to the lineage of the nation, he did this at a strategic moment to make a point to the European powers that Ethiopia intended to be independent, was independent, and would remain so. And the fact that Emperor Menelik had been the person to turn back the Italian invasion was doubly significant in that regard, because it reinforced His Majesty's and Ethiopia's determination to remain an independent nation on the African continent. A few thoughts.
Mama, may I?
Yes, I give thanks for that, Brother Jakes. Yes, and the statue definitely represents permanency. With the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw them being torn down all over the place. But the initial concept behind a statue is definitely permanency. Give thanks. Yes, yes, Bongo, I go forward. Give thanks, rest.
Yeah, give thanks. That passage is, for me, an interesting demonstration of His Majesty's own diplomacy and approach, as Jakes mentioned. The occasion of the coronation being used as unveiling, but we tend to forget that Addis Ababa as a new capital is really Emperor Menelik II who initiates that project. And if we're to really anchor it rightfully, it's Empress Taitu who causes the capital to really be where it was, based on the hot springs, etc. And so it's an interesting unfolding of a project of modernity, which really begins with Emperor Menelik, which Emperor Haile Selassie takes forward in a very international way. So in a sense, it's as though Menelik was really preparing the way for Emperor Haile Selassie to proceed without any clutter or problems in creating a new position of Ethiopia in the world, which is what I think Addis Ababa was to ultimately represent. And the way it unfolds as the coronation becomes the unveiling of the city, not just that statue, but of this new diplomatic center in Africa, which is what I think the coronation speaks to as being inaugurated. I just wanted to add that.
Give thanks, Bongo. I sort of like a kind of like a new faculty, right? Like a new trajectory, leaving the black print kind of follow this roadmap. Let's move in this vein. Let's go in this way. So really an itinuation of his own great journey, so that the work would continue. Yeah, yes. Give thanks for that that angle, bringing forward that angle, Bongo. I. Yes, I.
Rastafari family.
Mama Fire, you're on.
Aye, aye.
Rastafari family. Give a
Hey,
thanks,
give a
I
thanks.
don't find much talking, but me know if I am hear my voice, it bring more strength and joy to the idea. One perfect loving Rastafari. Not the Gideon.
Gideon, battlefield, Rastafari, I love Mama Fire. Give thanks.
Give thanks.
Aye. Love Mama Fire.
All right.
I love the item. I love the item. I love Haile Selassie and interest me. My
Aye.
dear, and I continually, Papa and Mama.
Rastafari, love Mama Fire. Give thanks.
Yes, I must strength, Mama Fire. Give thanks to head your voice, Rastafari live.
All right, Sister Wallet, we want to move to Brother Jelani and Ras Robbie
All
for
right.
the
Yes,
SOSACRU
I
report.
thanks. Rastafari, give thanks.
Okay, I guess I am up. Greetings, brothers and sisters. I want to greet you in the name of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie the First, and Empress Menen Aswa, and to give thanks for this yet another occasion for us to come together on the 21st of December, which has become our anniversary date in the School of the Sacrament, Rastafari University itself. I hope you're hearing me. You're hearing me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right, wonderful. After beginning a process in 2020 to form an online academic tertiary resource within Rastafari, 4 years later, we're here and we are happy to know that we've been moving from strength to strength, perhaps not as swiftly as we would like, but I think surely we are moving. This evening, I want to thank all of those persons who have been a part of our space, particularly those persons on the board who have contributed a lot of time and energy, and those of our membership and audiences who have been diligent in looking out for the things that we have been doing online. After 4 years, we think we know what we are doing a little better, and we hope we are in possession of clearer direction as to what are the important objectives that we can meet for ourselves and the wider community. Our first year really saw us trying to establish a presence within our community and a recognizable contribution. Second year saw us having some teething pains, growing pains, but I think we survived into our third year, which saw us a little more visible on the ground through our summer school, which occurred in Jamaica in the third year. And in the fourth year, we also returned to Jamaica, and we hope to do again our fifth year in Jamaica. You'll hear a little more about that. On our fourth year, webinars were not as robust as our first year, but I think we still nonetheless were able to facilitate 3 important conversations in that period of time. And one of our big objectives in this space is to be able to make impact in bringing important conversations that our community needs to have in a public way. And by that, I'm saying, you know, whether it is celebrating a special event, celebrating a special member of our community alive, or one who has transitioned, or pulling from our archive thematic issues that persons are interested in, or persons have cutting edge research on. Those are some of our important objectives as a public space. We also have a space that prides itself in being able to have interaction, and that space is more or less targeted at younger students in the university age group, and those are the persons who we have participated with in our summer school program. In the past, we have had contributors coming from the historically Black universities in the States, as well as standard schools like Johns Hopkins, and I think there's another school I'm not remembering, in addition to which we have had some local Jamaican participation in that. Ras Robbie will say a little more about the summer school when he speaks. So our ethos has been primarily that to provide a digital and online presence primarily, in addition to some face-to-face grounded relations, particularly in the summer. We want to move forward with our overall agenda as a university space. Our journal, which is entitled Rastafari Speaks, the Journal, has been a little delayed. We had hoped that we would have been able to hold up a copy of it in camera and show you that it's actually out. But it's way under production. It's actually in press with some minor finalizing from the editorial team before it can be made available. So we hope to have that out for you early next year. Just as a point of interest, the first issue of our journal celebrates Nana Ritter Marley and highlights the key conversations we had representing the matriarchal shift within Rastafari, which has been a part of the conversations that we have held here. So moving forward, as we go into our 5th year, and particularly as we call persons together to observe and to share with us this moment, we hope that we will make good our commitments to all of you in terms of our deliverables. In this forward coming, we expect the journal to be out, as well as to participate in at least 3 important webinars. One in January, which looks at modern Ethiopianism and the legacy of Ba, 50 years after the Ethiopian Revolution. One which will take place in April, which is directed at the visit of His Majesty to Jamaica and the Caribbean in 1966. As you all know, in another 16 or so months, that visit would have been at a Diamond Jubilee of 60 years. And we have some ideas as to how that can be made into a very special regional celebration. And then our final webinar, which we hope to take place sometime in June, or planned webinar sometime in June, will look into a new theme area for our conversations here, which is looking at Rastafari geographies. I have 2 more things to share before I go. One has to do with a conversation that, particularly given the reading that Mama Willette shared earlier with us about His Majesty honoring former emperors, I wanted to share with this group, for your reaction, a conversation had with Prince Asfa Wasen Azarati, who suggested that Rastafari communities internationally should seek to prepare a petition for the church, as in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for the canonization of His Majesty. And he, at that time, said to me that many emperors have been canonized, and it would be an important step in the whole appreciation of the wider Ethiopian society as to the important service His Majesty brought to the country through the church's elevation of him in that way. I'm saying this because this is a conversation I think the international Rastafari would need to have and support. The final thing I want to share here is one related to a similar matter, but this one relating to an elevation of our own first Rastafari, Leonard Howell, as within this SOSACRU space, to ensure that we commit to that process of having Pinnacle and his legacy properly preserved, documented and honored. I know that there are a number of initiatives locally that have sought to do that. In the SOSACRU space, we think that it is important that we also assign that kind of importance to Leonard Howell. I'm going to stop at that in terms of what we wish to share from our space moving forward. We've always had a habit of sharing widely with our mailing list our projects and programs as they emerge, and we will continue to do that going forward. I'm going to ask Ras Robbie to just briefly comment on our summer school project, which he coordinates, and to give you a sense as to what the next offering will involve. And then after that, we will move on to our main attention around the reflections on Irice's life, provided by another founding board member, Jake Homia. Before we came into camera, Robbie, I'm just going to end. We mentioned Roy Auger, who celebrated 100 years on Tuesday. Many of you will know him as one of the pioneer Rastafari researchers in the 1960s, the report on Rastafari movement. He's one of the 3 authors and the only one surviving. There was some attention to him on Tuesday. He apparently shares the same birthday as the current Pope, who is a mere 88, as Auger turned 100. So that was noted as a significant thing by those celebrating him. But essentially, we've asked you to come here to help us to hold a ritual of celebration and reflection and intentionality as we move forward. The shortest day that we have chosen is really to help us to be mindful going forward, using the return of the sun as an important thrust for our own visibility and serious work as a space here. I thank you again, and I turn over to Ras Robbie, who will take us forward. Thanks, Ras Robbie.
Give thanks, Russ, Jelani. Blessed love family. It's good to be with ones and ones. Yeah, just to briefly recap on the summer schools. The first one we did was an online one. And then the next one we did was in St. Lucia. The base we had was at Priest Kailash and Bongo Wisely attributed as well. I see Bongo Wisely on the call here. And then the last 2 years we've done it in Jamaica. And the summer just gone, we brought students to Mama Fire. I know Mama Fire's on the call. So yeah, and we take them around and we try and give them an immersive experience. We've had students from Johns Hopkins, Morehouse, Howard, American University, and we're always looking to kind of partner up and expand that base. One of the things that we're doing this year, and we're probably going to do it in May and time it around Africa Liberation Day, is we're going to have the students doing a whole course on Rastafari and the connections between the Rastafari community in Baltimore and DC area and forward in the Caribbean again. So we're going to have a whole semester-long course. We'll bring ones in like Mama Walete, Raskaimo, Idol family. And one of the things that we're trying to innovate is to have them learn something about Rastafari before they come forward to Jamaica in this case, but also to get them to actually do work with and for the community, so that they come forward with things, and students can do research, they can address issues that might be of help to the Rastafari community. So that's one thing that we're trying to do. And as a Rastafari university, we have to level things and each one teach one. So we have to bring the students in as knowledge co-creators as well as being students. So yes, that's what we've been doing so far, and that's what we're going to carry on doing. And give thanks for these few words, and then I'm going to pass it over to Sister Colleen. Sister Colleen, is the eye going forward with this, or do we go straight to Raskaimo?
We actually go straight to Raskaimo.
All right, Raskaimo.
Set and ready. Thank you for keeping the
fine.
time, Brother Robbie.
Bless it.
Brother Jelani almost made same. Let me pin.
It's the right time, sis.
Always the right time. Brother Jake's in spotlight.
Yeah. You gotta start how many people.
Am I ready to go, Sister Colleen?
Yes, please.
One perfect love, brethren and sistren, greetings in the name of His Imperial Majesty, Kedamawe Haile Selassie I and Empress Menenaswa. It is my profound honor to be here this evening, to be able to honor the life and works of Congo Irice Clark. I have known, it's been my honor to have known the patriarch for 44 years. I first met him in Jamaica in 1980, in November of 1980 at the Golden Jubilee Nyabingi and Angelites. There's a long story that goes with that. I will not belabor it now. But in my 40 minutes, I will be challenged to get through this. So let me, as a preface to what I'm going to say about Congo Irice's life and works, let me say that 3 weeks ago, I gave a similar PowerPoint presentation that focused exclusively on Ras Irice, and I will pretty much do the same here this evening. But I want us to be in a mindset that thinks about the elder's life as emblematic of his generation and even the generations that were before him. What is significant for me, as someone who has been immersed in the history of the movement through the testimony of the elders now for 44 years, is the period roughly from the late 1940s through we could call it the 1970s, which was the most difficult period that Rastafari brethren and sistren faced. The movement and its members were in a position to prevail against all odds and have done so through hands and hearts working together and through the intervention of His Imperial Majesty. But it's not simply the life of one person, it's the history, the collective memories of many people who have gone through this difficult period, as Ras Irice would say, who have trod the winepress of Farai and who have prevailed resolutely with their faith intact. So as we consider the time and places of Ras Irice's life, let's consider the history that goes along with that. That's a history that has survived primarily through the memories and testimony of elders like himself. And with his passing, there are very few left of his generation. I can think of maybe 3 or 4. And no doubt there are others, but in my experience, I can think of very few others who made this passage. So let us think about how we publicly preserve this history, how we secure our past, and how we live in the present and move into the future. Because we know who controls narratives of the past controls the narratives of the future. So with that, Congo Irice Clark. And maybe Mama Willetta, you already, or Mama Colleen, you already need to, I'm not sure why this is not going forward. Technology has always been my downfall here.
Okay.
Why am I not? Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. So Ras Irice, although he was born in Jonestown on Puyat Street, September 27th, 1938, spent his early years in Kelletts. His mother, Vernice Maud Robotham, was the postmistress in Maypen. His father was a shopkeeper from Portland. And he spent his early life in Kelletts and ultimately went to Kingston to school in Calabar. His birthday, September 27th, was auspicious by Rastafari standards. It marked the Ethiopian feast of Mascaram, the Maskell, which marks the discovery of the true cross. So in a Rastafari sense, from a very early age, Ras Irice carried the locks, carried the cross, and ultimately would wear the crown. But when we think about that in a different sense, was it really that auspicious? Because we're talking about a time in which if Jamaican parents saw their son, and Jah forbid their daughter, turning to Rastafari, there were only two options. One was, come out to my house. You're exiled. You're out of this house. You will be disowned by the family. The other was to attempt to reorient the person. And Ras Irice's father attempted to do this when he left his home at age 13, living then at that time in Kingston. The first thing he did, the father came and collected him on the beach at Paradise Street in East Kingston, dragged him home under force and duress. He stayed for maybe a week to 10 days and was off again. And then his father sent two thugs to collect him, and Ras Irice outwitted them. So began his life in Rastafari, his trod in Rastafari. The tradition of Ras Irice in Jamaica as Rasta from age roughly 13, 14, 15 starts in 1953 at Paradise Street in Raytown, moves to Warwick Hill for 5 years, to Backawall for a short period, on to some rural living in Button Bay, Foreshore Road, West Kingston. So those first 25 years of his life are really in the camps and yards of Kingston, where there's already a deep and profound Rastafari tradition. He later moves on to Ocho Rios and back and forth to Kingston, interestingly, having been given a job by one Peter Marley, who Ras Irice, up until maybe the last 5 years, had no idea was Bob Marley's half brother. It was the Marley and Plant Construction Company through which he got this job, and then later spent time in Ocho Rios. And then in 1988, he relocates to Baltimore. And there's, as I said, a long story behind that as to how Ras Irice made an intervention with myself at the Smithsonian, and somehow together, through the power of the Most High, we managed to get him a visa, and we came up right in the aftermath of the 1988 Nyabingi Elders Trod. So his Paradise Street time period. Paradise Street, he was living right here down at the bottom of Paradise Street, near the beach. It's to the far right of your screen. He's living right between the General Penitentiary and the Bellevue Asylum. Probably at age 15 or 16 in that spot by the asylum, he gets to hear Leonard Howell preach from the asylum. And he's deeply moved by this, deeply inspired by this. He's also coming into contact with more established Rastafari at the time. He's not that far from Renwick Lodge. He's makes contact with Count Ozzy and his group. He gets to know Douglas Mack and Fillmore Alvarenga, who frequent the Paradise Beach where he is sometimes to come for herbs, sometimes for fish. And he's being connected with a whole series of other brethren, like Bongo Spence up on the top left here, who was an individual in Mortimer Plano's circle, Ross Historian, who he spends time with later during his Work a Hill session, but he knows historian Bongo Trevor Campbell, aka Gabriel Selassie, Ross Sarge, who becomes a well-known artist, Ras Ayavi, who's well-known in Raga and Ganja circles these days. He knows them from the McGregor Gully Camp and from Rhineland. And he also is connected with a whole group of individuals who come through his place at Paradise Street, sometimes to sell. At the bottom left here is a shot of Russ Irice being reunited with Russ Irie Irons, who was in his early days was selling Ital peanuts, riding his bike around Kingston, and Iris and he got to know each other quite well. The Paradise Street period, which was between 53 and 58 roughly, had a few significant events during that period. The Howlites, who began to appear in Kingston after the 1954 raid on Leonard Howe's camp. Iris got to interact with a number of them and was inspired by them. The street marches in support of Mau Mau in 1953 and 1954. This whetted Iris's appetite for all things African, all things of African people and resistance to colonialism. Iris, as I'll talk a little bit more about later, later began to visit the law offices of Dudley Thompson, who defended Jomo Kenyatta in 1952. He's also there, Iris is also there in 1955 when Mamie Richardson comes to Jamaica representing and promoting the Ethiopian World Federation and the land grant in Shashamane. Now, she spoke at the Jamaica Success Club on Wildman Street, but Iris did not find her there. He found her in the Dungle when she was addressing brethren, Rastafari brethren there, and he was on that spot, a young brethren taking this in. This thing about connecting with any kind of events that are pertinent to the struggle of African people, to the destiny of African people, Iris inserted himself over and over into these moments, and this was part of his self-education. He became a person of Pan-African consciousness. And of course, later in that same decade, the All-Island Rastafari Convention in Bacawal. I just included this slide because it references Dudley Thompson and Jomo Kenyatta. You'll notice Mortimer Plano standing to the right. This is 1972 when Thompson is returning some archival materials to Kenyatta, and a historic moment for sure. But it was his law offices where Iris would go to collect things like the magazines, like the African Challenge and African Opinion, and he would collect these along with books that he would get from Ras Lokai at the Addis Ababa bookstore. And he started a little library, a Trueberry, on Paradise Street where he was. The 58 convention I mentioned because Iris was there when the convention was being dismantled by the police. When the police were there after the capture of Victoria Park by Ross Timothy Hill, who was Prince Emmanuel's, now King Emmanuel's armor bearer at the time. And you see the Queen Victoria statue in the middle simply because Iris remembers a few years later when Ross Timothy Hill surmounted the plinth of the statue and whacked off the orb, which you probably can't see well in this picture, but there's no orb there where it used to be when the statue was first erected. So Irice is having connections with all of these major events and all of these major leaders. There was another thing that was going on at Paradise Street. Irice, at a very young age, roughly 15, 16, was becoming an herb man. He was becoming what he called an herb cutter. And in those days, people who know what an herb cutter knows know that what he was doing was he had a portion of herb and he would wrap off small portions of it, measured out, wrapped up in paper bag, and sell these. So at this fishing beach, he had like a 5-gallon pail, and he was being provisioned by another herb cutter by the name of Chummy. And he would sit on this pail, and as people would come by, they knew what he was sitting on, and he would sell herb. He became one of the most renowned herb cutters in Kingston and knew most others in the city, including a brethren named Mint Chip, who lived at Greenwich Farm Beach and who basically was at the time said to have the best herb in Kingston. Later, Irice, after Mint Chip would come and visit him, learned that he now had the best herb in Kingston. But the herb portion, the herb entrepreneur aspect of Irice's life is something that went through all facets of it, and was important on many levels. In 1958, Irice, this self-educated, zealous, inspired young brethren, now 20 years old, has attracted a number of others around him, and he makes a move to Warwick Hill, at the end of where Renwick Lodge would be. He's up above that portion. The center picture here, by the way, is not Ras Iris, but it's atmospherically similar to what it might have been on Warwick Hill. This was the Ital session, the extreme sackcloth and ashes life that Irice and his 9 or 10 brethren were living at the time. They basically renounced all flesh. There was no meat, no use of leather, no shoes, no belts, not even touching drums. They were chanters, but they chanted percussively. If there was any percussion, it was clapping and percussion on the body. It was a raw food tradition, and it was a Ital herb tradition. The ones below listed, the names below, names like Tawny, Eastonman, Crucy, Ras Headful, Ayunkumpi, Bullarim, Ras Marcus, Dizzy Johnny of the Scatolites, that Dizzy Johnny, yes, and brethren named Foodeye and Xander, as well as Bongo Time and Keith Miles, Ras Milo, were frequent visitors to the camp, along with ones like Bongo Pidao. So this was a extreme natural living kind of situation in which, if I was an anthropologist, which I happen to be, I would tell you that part of what was happening here was the brethren were stripping down the essentials of life, living in harmony with nature, as if to recross the threshold from nature to culture and to reinvent the new man. Part of this tradition was also the innovations which this group, known as the Igelic House, brought to Rastafari speech. In recent years, we hear of that speech as dread talk, and sometimes we hear of it as ayaric, which is a more recent term for it. But Eitzvar was the term that they used. And when they were trotting as a group and might come upon a gathering where Bingi would be celebrated, they would announce themselves by the phrase Ayunkum Ayada, Ayanay Ayanting Ayazes Antuayaka Yada Ayasti Oliai. Ayunkum Ayada is a is an interesting phrase. What it means that is to them was the Nyabingi order is here. The way in which that permutation comes about is through the fact that the brethren at that time, many brethren called the Bingi order the Bongo order. But as we know, Bung can't go, so Bung have to come. So it's the Ayunkum Ayada. And many of these permutations were words like Iowa and Eitzful, which have really no direct English equivalent, as does Irice, come out of this group. They basically, they basically disseminate this. They disseminate the cultural perspectives that they were developing along with the language through trotting between Warka Hills and Backawall and other parts of West Kingston, like Moonlight City, other parts, but then also trotting to country parts. And here's a small list of ones that, Ross Irice gave me. I don't have all the years for these. I'd have to go into my notes for that. But essentially, as they trot out, Rastafari locally was this aspect of the culture was being disseminated. I don't think it's unfair to think of this group of individuals as being somewhat of a vanguard within a generational vanguard within the Nyabingi order. They were reformatting, if you will, parts of the livity as it developed of Rastafari. As I think I mentioned, this was an all man, largely an all man, a no flesh, an extremely austere trod. But as in all things, empresses, datas, sistren have to come into it. So while for years, when I would be reasoning with Ross Irice about this, it was always an all-man trod. Until finally, when we had the Discovering Rastafari exhibit in Washington in 2007, this sistren that Ross Irice knew as Sister Ruby came, and Sister Ruby, now known as Empress Mayana, was the only person trotting in the sackcloth tradition at the time, and she too was visiting the hill visiting the brethren on Worka Hill, along with Margarita Mafu. That's Don Drummond's partner, who sadly was murdered by him, at least as the history has it. And she was reunited with Ross Irice and also Baba Marcus at the time of the exhibit in 2007. But Sistren came into it, and later Irice would remark to me what an amazing thing it was to see her and Margarita Mafu trotting from Backawall to Warwick Hill and vice versa in sackcloth. In this same decade, 1959, May 7th, the Coronation Market riot. Another point that several elders, have pointed out to me over the years that kind of gets forgotten in the history of Rastafari. But this was an event in which a brethren named Ross Amos got into a scuffle with a police or members of the fire brigade at Coronation Market riot. 87 people were arrested. And in the course of this bangarang, the riot spilled out into Backawall. Now, if you take a look at a map, Backawall isn't next door to Coronation Market. Backawall is a fair piece down the road. But in any event, it reached Backawall somehow. And Ross Irice talks about being there and being present and seeing police trim a brethren named Brother Ozzy, not Count Ozzy, Brother Ozzy, who had a large set of sprang on his head, large locks, trimmed him with a machete. And a whole heap of violence took place against other brethren. The fate of Ross Amos, as Irice told me several times, was that he went on for a couple of years and nothing seemed to happen. But about 2 years after the riot, he was killed. Someone, perhaps either urged by political interests or whatever, someone took a rock the size of a Christmas turkey, and he lived in a depression off Foreshore Road, and they threw it down upon where he was sleeping and crushed his skull. There's nothing to do about that. You're not going to get justice in those days for anything like that. Because the Warwick Hills camp was raided 3 times in the early 1960s, in 1960, 61, and 63, Irice has also already had all of these contacts in Bakawal and Akiwak, and he was relocating. He was in the process of relocating to Bakawal after these arrests. Sorry, that was you, Sister Colleen?
No, Jakes, but you have.
But you're at your 25-minute mark.
I'm at my 25-minute. We'll give thanks.
So
Okay.
keep going.
So moving on with alacrity here, my colleagues. Bakawal was a place that Irice got to know Prince Emmanuel well. He along with other members of the Angelic House would take in services at Prince Emmanuel's gates in Akiwak. And through his own self-education, he described himself as someone who he didn't keep company kept him. He was a reader. He was someone he could reason with any elder in Bakawal, and he was very proud of that. And these are among the historic figures who were figures in Ras Irice's life. Ras Bonerjis, Bongo Lide, who lived on the front page of Bakawal, Ras Dermanite, Sister Miriam, who was someone in Coronation Market that Irice and other members of the Angelic House would connect with. She was someone who would often let off brata to them for their Aital tradition. Bongo Puro down here, Congo Rocky and Mama Baby I don't have Congo Rocky here. Bongo Hill again, and Sister Ina, who was at the time with Bongo Lide. And just a few other photos to put Ma Shanti and Pa Shanti in the mix because they were also part of Irice's circle. After Bakawal was destroyed, Irice took up residence on Foreshore Road between the camp of Sam Brown and the camp of Ras Shadrach. And he sojourned there and knew these elders quite well. He also, in roughly around 64 or 65, was introduced to Mortimer Plano, Brother Plano, by Brother Keith Miles, Ras Milo. And he got to know everyone. He started visiting Plano's camp, Plano's yard on 18th Street, a place where many people from Jimmy Cliff to Roland Alfonso to Ross Michael to Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Whaler visited. And when Irice was living in Trenchtown on West Street, he would often get requests of Bob would send a youth down to him and say, send up a good draw, Irice. So he got to know Bob and his family pretty well. He was also, so as I said, as I pointed out, his was an expanding Pan-African consciousness. He remembers seeing William Tubman in 1954. He remembers seeing the brethren here, whose name I forgot when I gave this the first time, the premier of Eastern Nigeria. It's coming to me, folks.
That Michael Okpara.
Michael Okpara, thank you. Michael Okpara, Walter Rodney, and Maurice Bishop. And he met Michael Okpara personally, along with other members of the Angelic House, right here in the corner of Coke Chapel and Queen Street. After Okpara had given a lecture at the Institute of Jamaica, And he tells me about the fact that Bongo Tawny gave him one of the regalia that he was in the custom of knitting at those times. Irice was proud of his African knowledge and his Pan-African knowledge, and he was a kind of he loved using long multisyllabic names that no one else could, kind of come up with. And I remember when we did the Discovering Rastafari exhibit at the Smithsonian, we had this photograph on the left of Jomo Kenyatta with this dreadlocks brethren. And I had labeled it as Kenyatta with Dedan Kimathi. I couldn't imagine who else it could have been other than Dedan Kimathi. And Irice later came to me about a couple of months after the exhibit was up. He comes to me and he says, "Jakes, you got it wrong, man." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, man. It's not Dedan Kimathi, it's Field Marshal Musa Mawariyama." And that's the same kind of name like when he would talk about the Zanzibar revolt that he would throw at you. He would say, "Well, you have to remember, John Okilo and Abdul Rahman Muhammad Babu." And he would roll those names out like, it was Jack and John. But he had an encyclopedic knowledge. Even though 1963, perhaps in Jamaica, is remembered most for the Coral Garden massacre, Irice remembers seeing Miriam Makeba and Stokely Carmichael, later Sekou Touré, remember seeing them in Bakawal. He recalls, to the best of his memory, that it was Harry Belafonte who brought them there. They came to Bakawal. They came through the place called Bump, which is the entrance to Bakawal. And they talked with the Rastafari brethren, who clearly it gathered a large crowd, but they talked about the apartheid situation. When I gave this talk the last time, I talked about how that's a very interesting conjunction chronologically, because it was either immediately before that or immediately after the visit of Bakawal that Miriam Makeba provided the opening entertainment for statesmen who gathered to found the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa. And according to my reading, it was Emperor Haile Selassie who offered Miriam Makeba his office to change into her stage clothes. So it's kind of one of those amazing conjunctions, but nothing's amazing in Rastafari. The Coral Gardens massacre was another thing that was very much on Iris's radar screen. He could talk. He could tell you much about the kinds of blowback that was taking place in Kingston, a long way from Montego Bay, when the Coral Gardens event took place. But Rastas were being trimmed and brutalized all over the island. And that was when the last raid on Iris's camp in Warwick Hills happened. Irice was, as he described himself, something of a camp master, and he was the one who felt that he led the group. But really, the way I have it is by his own definition, being a camp master was somebody who provided the conditions for the hosting of community. And it's something he would later do here in the US. The visit of His Imperial Majesty was huge. Again, Irice inserted himself into every kind of meeting that involved Rasta, whether he was invited or not. And so just a couple of weeks before the visit of the Emperor, Donald Sangster and Edward Siaga held a meeting at East Racecourse, and Irice was there when they were telling the group of Rastafari leaders, how it was going to go at Palisados, who would do this and who would do that, and that the only people who would be playing drums would be Count Ozzy and his group. And Irice, of course, in his testimony said he knew then, not Nagosa, wouldn't go that way. But as he put it in his testimony about the visit, that was his graduation in Rastafari, seeing His Majesty. Nothing could ever take his heavens off the Majesty after that. So we roll forward now to 1988. And Irice he's had a 35-year trod in Jamaica. Man say him dance a yard, so now I'm ready for dance abroad. It didn't really go like that. He called me up at the Smithsonian. Somehow he got my number. He said, I need to get on this trod, but I don't have a visa. We had already gotten 26 visas for brethren and sister to travel. I didn't know that I could do a thing about it. I called the consular agent that I had spoken with. I called him back and said, the consular agent says to come in. He'll see what he can do for you. The rest is history. Irice was there 2 weeks later. And he followed what was known here as the Rainbow Circle Throne Room Trod that came up in May of 1988, came through New York, came from there to Baltimore and DC. And this was all taking place in the context of propaganda about the Rastafari that basically said the Rastafari are violent, vicious drug dealers who use automatic weapons and a whole heap of terrible things. I've got one of the syndicated columns by Jack Anderson, who basically said that during the 1980 elections in Jamaica, something that I lived through and I experienced some of that violence. During those elections, Rastafari were responsible for many of the murders. Not Negoso. So 36 years, the next 36 years is Irice in the DC, Baltimore, and other communities up and down the eastern seaboard, as well as Chicago. This is something like a curriculum vitae for Irice, and I know it's like not something people want to read off the screen, but I'll just note the first thing here, which actually took place in Jamaica, 1975. When Irice was living in Ocho Rios and using his work ties to access vehicles, that he would collect brethren and take them to Bingi. He happened to go to a Bingi at Strawberry Fields in a place called Rose End and meet with Philip Jackson, who was then working for the Agency for Public Information. Jackson was there videotaping that Bingi. I'd like to see that footage. And Irice connected with him, and later in 1975, Jackson and Russ Irice went and videotaped an interview with King Emmanuel in Bull Bay. I'd like to see that footage wherever that exists. I'm guessing that this was because the Bobo camp was at that point maybe only 3 years old in Bull Bay and making its own kind of splash. This is the rest of the CV, a whole series of things related to connections with the Jamaican Embassy, the Smithsonian Institution, participation in RALAC, which is a North Carolina-based Rastafari festival, where he and Pa Jack, another member of the community here, participated in, etc. The Elders Trod, where he comes in 1988, he picks up where Sam Brown and others left off. A whole group of different kind of travels, including traveling to Chicago and reconnecting with Russ Gabriel, who he knew as Brother Fish, another one of Brother Plano's brethren, and also traveling to the Oyatunji village in South Carolina. Russ Irice's meeting with personalities is itself a whole other story, which I dwelt on when I gave this presentation earlier. But believe it or not, Russ Irice had the opportunity to meet with Henry Kissinger, Mick Jagger, James Bond, aka Sean Connery, Sidney Poitier, Morgan Freeman, and the other, I'm sorry, famous black actor. I'll move on from there, but those are a whole other parts of the history. none of what Russ Irice did in Jamaica or here in the US in the DC Baltimore community, he did alone. He did it by working with other brethren. Without Russ Irice, there would have been no Rastafari participation in the 1989 Folklife Festival at the Smithsonian. And the overall story here was a story of the stone that the builder refused. He did it with other individuals, Nana Faraika, Bungo Pidao, Pa Jack Hewitt, who was an original member of Russ Michael and the Sons of Negus, and Baba Marcus, who was an original member of the Igelic House on Warwick Hill. There were others involved, like Mama Bubbles, Bungo Sheffon, Bungo Tawny, etc., Bungo Biga, who you see here, and Pa Jack Hewitt. They moved together and they created community together. But Russ Irice was someone who created family and created community wherever he went. And in my view, I will say he embodied the tenets of His Imperial Majesty perfectly. He was someone, he didn't care whether you were black, brown, white, yellow, red. It made no difference to him. He wanted to know what your consciousness was and what your heart was. And he would work with anyone he felt he could work with. More in the Folklife Festival. These are just kind of interesting pictures now. The thing I had said about why the Folklife Festival was interesting was because the Jamaican individuals, this was a festival that was basically focused on the Afro-Caribbean traditions. There were Haitian Vodun practitioners there. There were Santeria and Palamante practitioners from Cuba. There were Son representatives from Puerto Rico, and there were Maroons and Kumina people. Miss Queenie was there at this festival, among others. Colonel Harris was there. But the Jamaican representative did not want to endorse a Rastafari group to represent. That's why I say the Rastafari group that did represent, which was 15 individuals, would never have been here were it not for Russ Irice. He managed to organize and fundraise and prepare the Baltimore, Washington community to provide the accommodations for this. And when the last day of the festival came, there was supposed to be a historic meeting between the paramount king of the Ga people. Note the retinue and the royal umbrella. And here, the top right photo, we see the paramount king meeting various representatives. You'll notice in the white here is Bungo Pita. Behind him is Ras Iris, and there's a sister Imani from the community there. It wasn't the Moortown Maroons that were received by the king. It was the Rastafari brethren and sistren who were received. And that became the story of the entire festival. The pictures like this particular picture of Ras Earlites and the Paramount King of the Ga was printed in the inside of the next year festival guide, which that festival guide became so popular that I myself couldn't get a copy of it. Now this is a shot of Russ Irice in the Bingy House here in DC on M Street and 5th Street. And when I showed this photograph in the presentation celebrating his life 3 weeks ago, there was a kind of automatic rise in the group, in the 100 or so people who were assembled. And it was quite clear. I had an epiphany from what followed from that for those who became Rastafari in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, who became Rastafari here, individuals like Ras Iris and Pa Jack Hewitt, they were Leonard Howell. And it was as if the birth of this community in DC, Baltimore was repeating the very origins of the movement itself. Now, I kind of knew that at some level, but you in the vibe of Rastafari, you get to know it again in a deeper kind of a way. The same kind of way in which Russ Irice was a camp master in Warwick Hills, he was a housemaster here for several gates, hosting community in Washington, D.C. And again, he didn't do it all by himself. He did it with Pa Jack, with other individuals I've mentioned, and he had those that he mentored in all of this, including Ross Kwasi, who has now gone on to be a force in the community with his program, The Lion's Voice, doing great work. Here we see Iris and Pa Jack and Brother Sidney greeting Russ Earlites from Jamaica. And in the bottom picture, we see him hosting Russ Tuwelde and Russ Emanuel from Italy. The 2004 50th anniversary of His Majesty's visit to the U.S. These are among the kinds of things that get hosted in the DC community. They would be celebrated. They were certainly celebrated. It was certainly celebrated in other communities. But there's a kind of critical mass that developed here through Russ Irice, Pa Jack, and Baba Marcus's presence, and Mama Farika's presence, Nana Farika's presence, that have made the DC community something very interesting in on the Eastern Seaboard. We're always hosting visitors. I think I know this brother up here talking to Carl Philpotts, Brother Carl Philpotts. The brother next to Kwasi, to the right of Kwasi, is Bingy Glenn from the New York community with Russ Wayne Rose, and I don't know the brother next to him. And when I showed this slide at the celebration event, I said, you know, Russ Irice and other brethren were traveling even when they weren't traveling, because other people represented them. And in this particular case, this newsprint on the left is a piece from the Cape Times in 2000, which reported on the return of the Holy Pibby, the black man's Bible, to South Africa. This is when Carol Yanni and I went and took 50 copies of the Promised Key and disseminated it to the Marcus Garvey camp and the Burning Spear camp in Cape Town. And an article was written on it. They said, do you have a picture of any of the brethren in Jamaica? And I said, yeah, here's Russ Irice and Bongo Tawny, Bongo Biggie, and Bongo Sheffon. And they printed it up. So, but the most important thing of this was when we returned, this is one of the things I forgot the other week. Wherever I went, and this was true for everyone else in the community, if I went to Africa, if I went to Jamaica or anywhere else in the Caribbean, Russ Irice expected me to carry a report. It's the same with people like Brother Carl Philpott, who noted this at the celebration of Russ Irice's life. The fact that the Sheshamani Foundation is here in DC, Russ Irice was always keen to know what was happening on the continent. What's going on in Sheshamani? What's going on with the community being developed in Ghana that has DC-based Rastafari involved in it? This is Russ Irice, Mama Farika, Baba Marcus, and Brother Roy McPherson in consultations for the Discovering Rastafari exhibit. Russ Irice greeting the delegates who came for that, including Russ Jr. Manning, Russ Ivy, Russ Sheffon. But in the background of the upper right picture, you can see in the background Brother Fillmore Alvarenga being reunited with Russ Irice after I don't know how many years, many, many years. Fillmore Alvarenga and Russ Samuel Clayton, who were two representatives to that. Again, Russ Irice, Pa Jack Hewitt, with other members of the community standing in front of the banner for the exhibit. More of the same in the exhibit. The exhibit became an a happening and an event, a venue that brought the crown, sorry, not the crown prince, the head of the Crown Council, Prince Ermias, and his wife, Princess Saba, to the Smithsonian multiple times, and it was always an occasion for members of the community to come. Ras Irice on one side, Ras Sila from Panama on the other, and other community members. Pa Jack Hewitt with Rita Marley and Ziggy Marley when she visited in 2008. Other international visitors, including Mama Ifia below. More of the same kinds of Ross Michael, Brother Brissette with Iris and others at the opening. Again, Mayana, who was reunited with Iris at that time, along with Sister T. Image speaks for itself. Many, Mama Waletti can correct me if I'm wrong. Others can correct me, but I believe this is the meeting room at the Sankofa bookstore across from Howard University. Many meetings that IDOR had and other, that even probably before it was called IDOR, that the community had there. These are photographs from Rollock in roughly 2012. Ras Iris meeting with various ones, including again being reunited with Bingi Iri Lion, Ras Iris with his queen sister Danita. Don't need explanation. Anytime there was a reggae ambassador in town, Iris was there. Ras Iris with Luciano and Mama Bubbles next to him. More of the same. This is Bongo Trevor Campbell, aka Gabri Selassie, at his headquarters in 22 Law Street. He is now the ongoing head of the Ethiopian World Federation, Local 37. He wanted a blow up of the poster that was printed for Congo Iris's life celebration, and he keeps it with his archives, and it's probably posted on his wall there in 22 Law Street. For those of you who don't know, he's probably one of the very oldest elders. He just turned 90 a few weeks ago. And this is reiterating what I said at the outset, that we should think about how we're conserving this kind of history, and not only a history about people and events, but the places that formed the crucible for the development of Rastafari culture. How do we preserve that? I've been thinking about this for a very long time with some of my SOSACRU members, and I want to thank those who are doing this kind of work, like Wise Man Publication by Russ Flacco, Ijab Ilani Tafari, and Priest Dougie Smith, who've come out with a tribute book on the Rastafari elders, in which Iris, among many others, is in there. Last bow for Bongo Iris. And this says it all. He was indomitable, irrepressible, and irreplaceable. He wrote the name in the book of life with Ja golden pen. Rise in power, my brother. You're remembered eternally. And that's how we should think about all of the elders like Congo Iris, who are written in the same big book of life. It's our responsibility to preserve that remembrance. Babylon can go down in the pit of forgetfulness. I are about inscribing this forever, just like the monument to Emperor Menelik, but we need to find a way to do it. Rastafari, give thanks for your moments.
Give thanks, Jakes. I don't know, we're in Zoom, so we could do the shake of hands so he can see it.
Yeah,
If we can't share.
Okay.
Brother Jake, could you stop sharing the screen?
Stop sharing. Okay. Well, this is a process. So let me see if I can stop sharing now.
Amy.
Sister Amy, help.
Amy's
Brother Jelani, in the meantime, do you want to just
Yeah, man. So
lead?
Jake, I really want to thank you for that outstanding assemblage of one of our elders or leaders of this community. I mean, you did a kind of masterclass in just showing us how we can represent each other and curate their lives in a way that brings significance to their journey. You know, this was painstakingly thorough and very much engaging. I'm very grateful that Sister Colleen had the insight to say that this is something that we needed to ensure is shared in this way so that it becomes a part of our document. As you know, we've been archiving these webinars. I'm glad that this is one of those records. And, you know, just for my own self, I met Irice through you some years ago and immediately understood that we don't have another Irice. You know, he like so many members of our community is specific and individual, you know, who brings another element to our community, domestic and international operation. You know, I really liked the way he owned his role as an international ambassador and expected those around him to understand themselves, even if not appointed by a government. He still pretty much operated in that Howell tradition of being an Ethiopian statesman. And, you know, you've said it, but he immediately found a way of introducing me to those around him that he thought. In fact, he introduced me to Bingy Glenn and said, you know, you two need to know each other and work together. And, you know, immediately understanding that there is a network that he can facilitate and kind of even chaperone. That's what I saw him doing in that space. So I want to thank you for being so painstakingly, you know, detailed in the sharing and to open up to the wider audience, anyone who wishes to ask a question or comment. Jakes, you surprised me with a planner I've never seen before. I think you threw that one in there just for that effect. The planner with that sister beside him. Can you just comment on that as my last question while opening up for other persons to respond?
My brother, that photo was taken by Carol Yoni, roughly, I can't tell you whether it was 1970, but it was early 1970s, and that's Planner's daughter. And just something on your comments. You talked about how Irice put you together with Bingy Glenn. This was the genius of Irice. Irice was someone, because he had come through the crucibles of the formation of Rastafari Liberty. He overstood perfectly when it was time to hold the borderline, when it was time to protect the integrity of the culture, and when it was time to build bridges. And he knew, just as Mortimer Plano knew that. He was very much like that. By the way, he named his first son Morty in honor of Mortimer Plano. And the one piece that I forgot when I was trying to remember the name of the other actor that Irice met, that was Denzel Washington, a minor figure.
Yeah, give thanks. Is there anyone who has any comment or question before we return to more from His Majesty's select readings?
We actually have something from Mama Fire before we go back to the readings. But we could indicate by raising hands, Jelani.
Through the chair, greetings, Rastafari.
Yes, give thanks. Go ahead, please. Just identify yourself and
Yes,
go.
I am King Bingi Pele, third generation of Rastafari through bloodline. Mama Fire, one of Mama Fire sons, and giving thanks, for being here and hearing the glorious vibration and watching the pictures of as Iris as like a big uncle to I, because my old man tried with that Congo man for years, in his youth days, working around him through the housing development in them Iowa. So I learned a whole lot about him. So I'm learning more as life go by and giving thanks to him tried, Him tried powerful here in Jamaica and also in the States. So we give thanks and praises for his life, His life has been a wonderful one, touching many souls. Rastafari.
Aye. Blessed.
Give thanks, Bingi Pele. I see Rasquasi's hand. Go ahead, Rasquasi.
Yes, greetings, that divine name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Selassie the First. Glory and honor in the name of His chosen Queen Empress Waziri Menen. So great joy to come into this gathering and to see this presentation. We were able to see the presentation at the memorial, the tremendous memorial that the Washington, D.C. community had, led by IDOR. So I really give thanks that more ones internationally will have a chance to cite this up. I've also reasoned with Dr. Jakes, and we will be inviting him on the Lion Voice Network to give an extended version, along with reasoning, so that we can also put it out to the Lion Voice Network audience. I just wanted to that Irice is one of my greatest teachers. As a young college student attending Howard University, he was one of my very first Rastafari elders, and probably the elder I was closest with, Ras Irice, Nana Faraika. I would say had the most impact on I tried from that time until this time. Henceforth, even forever. And, Ras Irice was the one that would always challenge. His thirst for knowledge was ravenous. And he was always learning as well as teaching. And it taught I really a great example, because even though he had a photographic memory about history, African history, a very competent knowledge of biblical prophecy as well. A lot of ones don't know that side of Osiris. He shared with I commonly. But he was always on the cutting edge of African news, country by country. Ras Iris can tell you what's happening. We would discuss politics and these things on the continent, and he would break it down to the history from the independence time. So, for it really is an example of how I should live this live. The diplomacy, he had a rough side to him that few saw, we saw a little bit of that too, he was not a pushover, but he was also a one that really commanded respect, not only from Rastafari, the Pan-African community, diplomats here in Washington, D.C., foreign press, every level, from inner city to the highest diplomatic spaces. Ras Irice carried himself with that dignity, and it's our responsibility as IDOR, of which he was the first president. It's our responsibility to make sure that we preserve the legacy. We are also staking the claim of Ras Irice, that he was the originator of the word Irie, the originator of the word Ital, and a co-author in the Rastafari language. And it's very important to I and I to preserve that history and that legacy. So for these few words, I do give thanks. I want to just give special acknowledgement to SOSACRU, the work that they're doing to bring forward a Rastafari University. We also need a pre-K to high school, version of SOSACRU. So we're encouraging the educators to follow that example. It's organized and centralized time. So we really just give thanks for the leadership of IDOR, Mama Walete, Brother John, all of the ones who are working behind the scenes to ensure, Jasmine Giargis, that we continue these works. And I'm just praying that everyone on the line will also join us for the IDOR study group, Every Other Strong, where we do go over the teachings. I think we'll do a little sample here. It's a joy to see so many ones on the line. And we want to continue this energy into the Roman New Year and into this 2017 Ethiopian New Year. So for these few words, and I do give thanks, Rastafari lives.
Yeah, give thanks, Rasquasi. I want you to know that you are a wonderful student of the elder. When I met you some time ago in Washington, I remember remarking to myself that I didn't know we had young elders of your caliber. And yeah, man, so continue with the good works, commendable work in getting content out to this generation that you've been on, and energetically so. We give thanks for that energy you bring,